Hello. So today I'm going to talk about the election that we've just had and the fallout from it, particularly in regards to how media is reporting and the lies and the simplicities that we're kind of being given to regurgitate that omit the grander detail of what's really going on, because after all, it looks like a lot's changed, but really things are probably more similar now than they were before the election was called. So I guess I'm going to start by saying that the immediately afterwards, the left-sided media were heralding the election outcome as some kind of Corbyn victory, and the right immediately were calling for May to resign due to her losing a majority. But the reality is that May, whilst still losing her majority, in a gamble to increase it, still won the largest share of the MPs, and she will still make a government. So obviously there's a kind of irrationality that is going on here that, or I'd say is a simplification of what's going on here, that's making this whole issue kind of, or making the reporting of this issue not true to the reality of what's going on. The reason that this mattered to me was that I was keeping tabs on it live as it was happening. And the May disaster stuff surfaced within seconds and minutes of the exit polls. Now, the Tories actually did a little bit better than the exit polls predicted, which isn't a lot. I mean, they won like 317 seats, and the exit polls said something like 314. But as I say, she still lost her majority, but she still won nearly half of the MPs. And so because, say, the quickness at which this kind of May disaster stuff appeared, to me suggests that the guns were preloaded. In other words, they had the bullets ready to fire at her. But as I said, it's too simple to see it as Corbyn heroics or a May disaster. The sad truth is that people want these simple sentences with which to catalogue it and categorise it and be able to talk to each other, in ways they understand. They don't get the subtleties and the complexities. They just want to be able to regurgitate simple sentences that they can remember with their badly styled, 7 plus or minus 2 working memory. So I'm going to be as frank but as still embracing of the complexity as is necessary to truly grasp this. So yes, okay, May lost her majority, and she lost her majority in the hopes of securing a greater majority. That does mark her card with a minus. I mean, and under Corbyn's leadership, Labour did make some gains. But we need analogies here, not simple statements. The way to see it is that May invested her excess political capital hoping for profit. And she didn't profit, and she lost her excess capital, right? But besides a now slight compromise to her in the form of the DUMP to top up her number of allying MPs, she will still make a government. And Corbyn, for the opposing metaphor, was 3-0 down at half-time. In the second half, or the last 3 weeks of the election campaign, he pulled it back to 3-2. But in this analogous election cup final, he didn't win. Sure, he earned some plaudits, and sure, he made the fight meaningful, but despite all this discourse of change, we are almost exactly where we were before the election was called. Corbyn is in opposition, May is the Prime Minister. So yes, May lost her majority, her excess political capital, and her gamble. Even with her disastrous campaign, and Corbyn doing all that he could, no fundamental change really took place here. And unlike the Corbynites, I see it as a black mark for him. I mean, if you are fighting an opponent in a boxing ring, you get a few more points on the board, and your opponent is either not fighting back or punching themselves like May seem to do, and you still can't win. What does that say about you? Now, the Trump-Clinton election, to me, acts as the baseline here, and like all kind of currency manipulations, it's a baseline that's missing from this whole piece of political theatre. What is it? That is what I have just given you. That May gets to make a government and Corbyn doesn't. That is the baseline that's missing here, because without that kind of baseline of who makes the government, we're left with, well, Corbyn did better than he expected, May did worse than she expected, so that makes it look like a kind of simple win-lose. But as I said, even with Corbyn doing better and May doing worse, May still wins and Corbyn still loses. So you need that baseline. And the Trump-Clinton election showed many similarities in composition to our election that we just had, but vastly different outcomes. So if May, like Clinton, was the establishment pick, and Corbyn, like Trump, was the upstart underdog, right? Let's just say that's the way that it is. We can already see the glaring discrepancy in outcome. You must remember that Clinton had the whole mainstream media on her side, and Theresa May only had about half, maybe a bit more than half. But the point was that here in England, we don't kind of have a whole, like, all the press is left wing. We kind of have some vague idea that some of the press is right wing, whereas you go to America and it's all kind of leftist. You only get right wing in terms of the alternative media. Now, May, like Clinton, she had a proven track record of failure and disaster, of impropriety and subversion to be held against her. Like, not just suspicions, but like provable, researchable proof. You know, she was in government and she oversaw this disaster and that disaster. May oversaw the Snoopers Charter. There's genuine evidence for her improprieties. Now, May also, like Clinton, failed to fight a strong or convincing campaign, and both were propped up rather than they fought valiantly. So even though Corbyn had similar, if not more favourable conditions to Trump, Trump had all of the mainstream against him. So Corbyn's conditions were more favourable. The difference is that Trump got to take his oath of inauguration. Corbyn keeps the same seat that he had before, right? It's no different than before. So what is the difference here then? I mean, both Corbyn and Trump secured a youth groundswell, and to me the answer is rationale, reason and logic, because the glaring big difference is that Corbyn is a leftist, whilst Trump stands far more right-sided. I mean, whether he's truly right-wing or not is a debate to be had, but he's far more right-sided than Corbyn is. I mean, I think that's agreeable. So the operative here then is that whilst Corbyn gained on the Conservatives, he didn't poach any. He seems that he mostly took the kind of disgruntled UKippers who've got what they want with Brexit, so now they've got to kind of make decisions not based on whether Britain is part of the EU. But why? Why didn't Corbyn, or why couldn't Corbyn poach the right-wing people from May, like Trump could pinch the left-wing voters from Clinton? Well, Corbyn wanted to represent change, and that's similar to Trump. You know, Trump was against an incumbent opposition that he wanted to be a change candidate against, and Corbyn is the same. He was not in government, his party was not in government, so he represented a will to change. But Corbyn's change was idealistic and not realistic, whereas Trump's change was realistic, not idealistic, or his idealism was based on observable real facts. So whilst leftist Trump voters could understand the reason for what Trump was saying, rightists, in my view realists, saw Corbyn's airy promises as irrational and fictional, as they are. The tropes Corbyn traipsed about are the classic working class placations that realists, rightists or logicians have seen to be false or know as stupid beliefs. A democratic sympathiser can see rationally that illegal immigration is illegal, and so to live in a lawful state, illegal immigrants must be treated as criminals, not criminals. They could understand that. Whereas no matter how left-leaning the rightist voter was, they would understand that free university isn't free, for example. It can be given to the student without charge, right? But the bill for it must go somewhere else. And rightists or realists know that taxing more the rich, whilst being a sentiment one could have or might have, if you disregard the whole equality thing, of course, it rarely works out in practice. The historical provable fact is you don't gain the same proportion of monies as you do percentage points of tax increasing. Yes, you could potentially gain a little extra, but it is ignorant of the fact that when you change the ecosystem, you change behaviours. If I will tax you more, you will try and find a way to not have to pay it. Plus, the rich have the best access to those who can help do that for them. It's the same with Corbyn's unfreezing of benefits. It isn't a case where the numbers of benefits claimants is never changing. If you make benefits more valuable, more people will want them and will take them as well. Realists, rightists, or those who study some evidence rather than subscribe exclusively to idealism understand the extremely well-known economic concept of what you tax you reduce and what you subsidise you increase. If you increase subsidies to the welfare state, welfare usage will increase. If you tax more, you reduce the amount of people paying that tax. No doubt Corbyn's economic calculations are idealistic, in the sense that the number of people who will just stomach the larger tax burden will stay static, and it's the same for the numbers of people using benefits. And this is ignorant of reality. If you make benefits more valuable, the more people will take them. If you tax higher a certain group of people, then a certain amount of those people will find a way not to pay it. So you won't get the same. You can predict to make, let's say, an extra £1 billion in taxing that group of people, but you won't make that billion, because those people will, you might only make 500 million. I mean, yeah, of course, you could say, well, that's 500 million extra, but if you're forecasting to make £1 billion and half of that money doesn't appear because people change their behaviours, then you cannot use that as your budget. And this is kind of what Corbyn was saying. I mean, one of the common memes about it was that Corbyn's manifesto was actually calculated and that May's wasn't. But as I said, this, to me, it must have been idealistic calculations, in the sense that Corbyn was just hoping that if there was 150,000 people earning that £150,000 a year mark, that wouldn't go down, or even, well, that it wouldn't go down, and certainly that it wouldn't go down because the tax went up, if you see what I mean. And I say, these kind of, it's an ignorant, idealistic understanding of economics. So if you increase benefits, those who currently just about do better with work than being on benefits would reevaluate and say, well, why would I work if benefits now offer me more? And it's the same with, say, people who earn £150,000 a year. I mean, they would say, well, why am I going to lose 5% more of my money to tax just because they change the arbitrary tax threshold? And then they will obviously say, either attempt to find a loophole themselves or look for a lesser paying job which would work out more economically for them, or they would pay accountant more to find some way of not paying it, or they would, instead of being paid 150 grand, they would say I'll have 10 grand a year in company stocks. There are endless ways in which that they cannot pay the extra money that Corbyn would be banking on to fund his other extreme spending splurges. And this is the silly, crazy thing about it, is because generally the leftists are the ones who staunchly believe in kind of environmental determinism. They portray as real such unmanifest concepts as kind of systemic racism or patriarchy. But when you have provable economic concepts that show changing the kind of legislative environment is certain to reshape people's behaviour, boom, this kind of is gone. They cannot mould that into this. So whilst environmental determinism definitely exists, they cannot add that into their thought pattern when dealing with kind of economic planning. But as I said, the leftists are generally idealistic, and so the likelihood of what they want to happen is unrelated to the fact that they want it. I mean, they say what they want, they don't think about whether it's possible. It's an idea, it doesn't have to have facts or reason or evidence behind it. And that sentiment is a good jump-off point to actually analyse the detail of Corbyn's most persuasive, to an irrational person's promise, the free uni thing, right? So, as I already said, it is almost universally known, even to the leftists, that free education or free uni education doesn't actually mean it's free. By following my principles, I end up arguing a case I never thought I would argue, that I do not want student loans or fees to be abolished. As I said, I mean, surely most people can agree with me here, it's not free. Free uni education is not free. It's not like Corbyn has access to the necessary army of angelic payment abstaining professors that would be required to administer a truly free university education. Moreover, if we ended up with an extra £2,000 per year tax burden, and did the average 40-year work span, we would pay double or triple what I currently owe to the student loans company anyway. But I also argue against free education on the basis that if you want something to be valuable, like a university degree, it actually has to cost you something. Student lecture attendance is always patchy, but if it literally costs you nothing, do you think that the lecture attendance would go up or down? How many more dropouts and failures would you see if it had no cost attached to it? Now, boorish idiots would respond to me, or to this argument, with, well, why do you want students to have crippling debt? And obviously I don't. It is only a crippling debt if, like me, it isn't utilised. I mean, I have a degree, I don't work in the field, so sure, I have 30 grand that I owe, and without the subsequent high-paying psychology job to go alongside my psychology degree, yes, it's a crippling student debt. If I was determined to get into psychology, and I did, and I earned enough money to pay it back, then obviously it's not a crippling student debt, right? But it's crippling to most people because they go and get this degree and they don't actually ever gain a way to pay it off. And so yes, in that context it's crippling, but I don't want people to have crippling student debts. So as I said, I mean, I myself have a 30k debt, so in my own self-interest I should want it axed, right? Well, no, because I have actual principles. It is my cross to bear for believing the bullshit that a university education is necessary, or you can't get ahead without a university education, or something along those lines. It was my idiot decision that a degree was valuable or useful to me, and it's my price to pay for that mistake. I mean, I believe in consequences, and those are my consequences. I shouldn't have my it's when you take away consequences for bad mistakes that you infantilize people. And so I'm not a child. I made a mistake. I have to pay for my mistake. And everyone else who goes to university stupidly or unthinkingly or unnecessarily should also pay for the price. Should also pay the price for that mistake. And then there's another riposte that people kind of would put to me. I'm assuming they would say, well, why do you want less people to be university educated? And once again, for me, it's not necessarily that I want less people to be university educated, but I have the forethought to say that if there are more people that want a degree and are prepared to pay for it, then that's fine. But the leftist illogical inconsistency is at work here. They have, once again, environmental determinism is fine with patriarchy, and it's not thought of in terms of economics and legislation, but it really is warped here. They think if we have more degree holders, we will have more higher earners. If we simply churn out more degrees, there is more jobs for these degree holders to get. And obviously this is categorically and empirically false. We don't get 10% more psychology jobs by having 10% more psychology degrees. What you get is 10% more psychology degree holders stacking shelves in supermarkets. As I said, it's backwards to assume that you first create the object before you get its demand. A shrewd business person finds the gap before pouring resources into creating the things with which to fill it. You don't train 100,000 fine artists before you need them. You should need them before you train them, if you want to responsibly allocate your resources. So sure, if more people want to go to uni because they have personally identified a gap for them to fill, and which they need to get the degree to do, then and they are willing to gamble their financial obligation, then that's fine. I mean, more people can go to uni or less people go to uni, it doesn't matter to me personally. But as I said, it's demonstrable that this is not what is happening, and a free university degree only formalises what is already taking shape now, i.e. that a degree is becoming the modern equivalent of a GCSE, with as little chance of it kind of describing you as an elite character as a GCSE does. I mean, everyone or most people have got GCSEs, or the 10 requisite A to C grades, so they do very little in highlighting who is the clever people, who are the useful people, who aren't the clever people, etc. If everyone's got GCSEs, then how would you know which ones are the good people? If everyone's got university degrees, how do you know which are the useful people? You don't. Now, the final argument I will counter with this whole kind of free university thing is, this is one argument that I actually heard myself recently, and looking back, I once thought it myself too, and namely, this is, if we can afford bombs, we can afford to give people degrees for free. Now, the simplicity of this argument belies the simplicity of the person propounding it. Because sure, a degree is probably more useful or desirable. But under this kind of logic, under this thought pattern, under this lesser of two evils approach, then you could turn around and say, well, rape is preferable to murder. Couldn't you? I mean, if we're just taking two things in isolation and saying which one's better, then yeah, of course, degrees are probably more useful to society than more bombs. But this simple argument belies the omittance of the background that most multi-synaptic people would be able to decipher. Basically, the increased taxes Corbyn thinks he can incorrectly raise will pay the debt that is borrowed to pay... Well, basically, the increased taxes that Corbyn thinks he can muster to pay for this free university giveaway doesn't exist. I mean, we're talking here about government borrowing. We're talking about government deficit spending. And let me be real clear, I do not support state military intervention, if we're going back to the whole kind of bombs or degrees argument. I do not support state military intervention, but both the bombs and the free university aren't paid for by actual money. As I said, it's government deficit spending that, they borrow a whole load of money to pay for the free education, and then your future tax revenue is what is leveraged to pay, or to get that loan to pay for everyone's free student university. So, as I said, this is what I have an actual problem with. It's, the actual government deficit spending. And in my ideal situation, there would be no government deficit spending, so there would be no choice between free education or free bombs. Bombs would have to cost money, and education would have to cost money, and neither of them would be free. And it's only with the illusion of government deficit spending that you can portray something as free. Even as I said before, you're going to pay for it in your taxes later anyway, and I'll come on to that bit in a minute. But yeah, it's not bombs over uni degrees, but I don't want any government deficit spending, or the bombs or degrees that it finances. But of course, if you simply want something for nothing and are only interested in the idealistic want, not the actual facts regarding its implementation, then Corbyn's call for free university seems pretty appealing, but it's the dance with the devil, right? It's not free, you'll pay for it later. It's not free, we're borrowing loads of money. It's not free because somebody we still have to pay the professors, we still have to build the universities. It's not free. Now, I should also bring to the table the other forgotten fact here, that Corbyn's momentous second half performance only comes after a huge and almost universal rejection and derision. 6 months ago, he couldn't win a ping-pong match with a blind man, could he? During the period of isolation, I was actually fairly receptive to him. So how did he galvanise the support that he did? Well, it's the adoption of leftist tropes, the ones that I've described. He said, or started saying, these magic words that only work on children or adult children. The magic words of free stuff. This kind of thinking only exists in infants because they have the precedent of a caregiver supplying what they need or want without cost. All the time. Kid's hungry, his mum gives him food. The kid needs new clothes, his dad gives him the new clothes. There's no work, there's no payment, there's nothing. They just get what they need or get what they want. But any kind of semi-responsible and mature adult knows that there is no such thing as free. There is a deferred payment, usually at a higher cost. This is what the university thing is. Well, it's not free university, it's pay it later at a higher cost university. And there is also opportunity costs, which is like, I can't write my bestseller whilst I have a nice relaxing beach walk. Even though the beach walk doesn't cost me anything, I have to give up something else for it. So it's not free. Yes, it doesn't cost me anything, but it's not free. So as I said, there is no free. Everything costs. Nothing is free. And this is what costs Corbyn. The price of youthplication by using imaginary promises is the alienation of the adults who experientially know that free can't exist. And it doesn't exist, and usually is only a ploy to trick you or enlist you. Because as I say, there's no free. There's no free. So that's why Corbyn lost. But Corbyn lost even though he won. But as I said, you need the baseline here. You need the baseline of Trump. You need the baseline of the fact that despite Corbyn having a better playing field than Trump, he couldn't beat somebody like May, who had all of the hallmarks of the Clinton campaign. Based on historic precedent of the Trump election, it was Corbyn's to lose, actually, and that's why it marks him as a black mark, or he gets a black mark for not winning. And this is the opportunity costs that I allude to, is that yes, we can dance around him and say he did really well, he made a lot of gains, but the black and the white is that he's not making a government, and all of the media are kind of calling for May's head, even though she will make a government, whilst you translate her as Clinton, and even with all of the support she had, she lost. And so May, with all of her uselessness, still managed to win. So yeah, that's what I think. I'd like you guys to let me know what you think. Thank you.